Good morning, guys. So this morning I want to share from Acts chapter 24. I'm going to read verse 24 through verse 27. But some days later, Felix arrived with Drusilla, his wife, who was a Jewess, and sent for Paul and heard him speak about faith in Christ. But as he was discussing righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come, Felix became frightened and said, "Go away for the present, and when I find time, I will summon you." At the same time, too, he was hoping that money would be given him by Paul. Therefore, he also used to send for him quite often and converse with him. But after 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Portia Festus, and wishing to do the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul imprisoned. So, Paul had been sent in front of Felix to be tried for accusations of wrongdoing by the religious leaders of Jerusalem, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. But Paul was in Caesarea, not Jerusalem. And after hearing Paul's testimony, they couldn't find, the Roman leaders couldn't find any cause that Paul did that would warrant death or imprisonment. But to keep the Jews from revolting, I guess you could say, Felix put him in prison. Now, Felix was a governor of Rome, so Felix kind of put him under protective custody, I guess you could say. I mean, yes, he is a prisoner, but he's allowed some freedom to he's allowed some freedoms, like he's allowed for friends to come see him and things like that. He wasn't actually in like a lockdown prison. Well, Felix decides to bring his wife to visit Paul. So Paul starts talking about Jesus Christ, about the resurrection and everything. But then when Paul starts digging deep into righteousness, self-control, and judgment, it scared Felix. He became frightened. He didn't want to hear any more about any of what Paul had to say at that point. And but the real intent that Felix had was to obtain money from Paul. He wanted a bribe that he could use so he could free Paul. He spent 2 years trying to get money out of Paul. And, Paul wouldn't offer him any money. Paul would only talk about the gospel with him. And so after 2 years, another governor, Porcius Festus, was going to succeed him. But Felix, still not wanting to upset the Jewish religious leaders, decided to leave Paul in prison. And I read this little bit of a story, and, I'm thinking how easy is it for somebody to know what's right but doesn't do it because of fear, because of greed, or simply because you don't want to have to handle it anymore. I mean, Felix knew and already ascertained that there was nothing that Paul had done in Jerusalem to warrant anything, because he heard the accusations and he heard Paul's defense. But he didn't want to make a call. He didn't want to do what was right because it was going to upset the masses. So, how often do we see this in our society? And to me, whenever I read this little bit of passage, it just gives me the courage to be like Paul and do my best not to cave in to what everybody wants. Because Felix, by all rights, should have went ahead and released Paul. But didn't. So instead of releasing, Paul, he muddles and piddles for 2 years until somebody else replaces him, and he lays that burden upon his successor, which is Festus. And but the whole reason why Paul ended up in Caesarea anyway was because the Jewish leaders was approached by 42 men, and they told the leaders, look, we'll take care of your problems. So we won't eat and we won't sleep till Paul's dead. And I think these are other lesser leaders within the Jewish religious community. I think they were like scribes and such. And the plot was let out, and so a Roman centurion did the right thing and got Paul out of there in secret of night. And of course the leaders used that and actually tried to implicate that Paul was brought down violently ripped away from them to be brought to Caesarea to avoid trial or some malarkey like that. But the main thing I take from this is that Paul kept talking about Christ. Didn't cave into what Felix wanted, whereas Felix didn't necessarily cave into what the Jewish leaders wanted, because the Jewish leaders wanted Paul dead. And, Felix obviously saw that there was no rhyme or reason for it. But at the same time, when the truth was being spoken to Felix, Felix became afraid because the gospel was exposing to Felix everything that he was doing wrong. And he didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to hear the truth about what was doing wrong. And to me, Felix kind of represents to what I like to call the politician. You know, it's somebody who wants to please everybody to keep the peace, but is willing to hear the truth but won't act upon the truth. And then also he represents the ways in which people ultimately want to do what's best for them. I mean, Felix to me represents all of our flaws, where Paul represents to us exactly how we need to be. You know, having faith in Christ, keep talking about Jesus Christ, and exposing the truth to those who don't want to hear it. Anyways, that's all I got. I love you guys. You have a blessed one, and we'll see you tomorrow.